Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I've just returned from the greatest event known to man, woman, boy, or girl. I'm talking about the Payne McConkey Classic, which is also fondly known as the PMS. This is where we celebrate the life of arguably the most important athlete in snow. And that's a bold claim. To say that Shane McConkey is more important than any other skier or snowboarder of our time, but I really believe this. Now, you could say Mike's just saying that as he was friends with Shane. And really, I do think Shane liked me. But like all of the athletes I've worked with over the years, for the most part, they had to be nice to me as I was the one who did contracts with them. And a team manager that does contracts is the last person that you want to piss off. So most athletes were nice to me, and I consider them all friends. But as I think about it more and more, Shane really was the most important athlete innovator of our time. I mean, he was all about fat skis at a time where some people had the attitude fat skis, fat tourists, and they looked down on fat skis. But Shane realized that there was a huge advantage to that, and he was always looking for what was next. Then he was able to show the world his reverse camber and reverse side cut experiments in the spatula. And when Volant put that ski out, it was an instant cult classic. And if you skied it in powder, you knew Shane was on to something. And then, when Shane came to K2, he had so many ideas in his head. And he was finally with a brand that really wanted to listen. They were really a skier-driven brand back then, and you could tell. When Shane finally realized his POW ski dream with the pontoon, he didn't stop there. He kept pushing and pushing and pushing. He wanted to see rocker on every single ski in the K2 line. And that eventually happened. Even beginner skis had a rocker in them. And unfortunately, Shane wasn't around to see that, but it was all McConkey who was pushing for this technology to trickle down throughout the entire line. And it didn't just trickle down through ski lines, it trickled over into the snowboard category too. And while snowboarders don't usually like to thank skiers for anything, because skiers have treated snowboarders like second-class citizens for so long, every snowboarder who rides a board with some rocker in it, they don't owe skiers or Shane anything. But they should recognize that Shane McConkey was the man who was willing to put his career on the line in order to innovate, and that innovation helped both skiing and snowboarding. Big Mountain Jeremy Jones and I have talked about this. We podcasted on my first podcast, and we've podcasted again. And I can't remember when we said this, but we talked about Shane and how his innovations carried over onto the snowboard side as well. So it's not just me saying this. Jeremy Jones believes it as well, and I'm going to trust that guy. So it's established that Shane McConkey was a visionary, a pioneer in the sport. And he also recognized that outside of technology, creating organization within the sport was key to keeping it athlete-driven. So Shane and a crew created the IFSA, because the last thing that he wanted was a bunch of old white dudes who didn't like his kind telling him what to do with his sport. So he changed the game with product, and then he changed the game with organizing the athletes. And what doesn't get talked about enough is how great a skier Shane was. He was always looking for big, gnarly Alaska lines, and it seemed like every year, if he was healthy, he had a standout segment in whatever project he was a part of. And when he was injured, well, he created Saucer Boy, the ski town dirtbag hero, king of snowblading, who kept the industry laughing and his sponsors happy, even when Shane couldn't ski. That's the thing about Shane. He was so funny, sometimes in a crude way, sometimes in a gross way, and sometimes in a mischievous way. But it was never mean-spirited. And it was to give everyone a laugh at him and with him. And that was what was so great about Shane. He did not care as long as you were smiling. He was never too important for anyone, and he never took himself too seriously. He was the guy who would get on a chairlift with a shy kid, and he would have a conversation with that kid and get him talking and laughing and get him to come out of his shell. And that kid, he would remember Shane for the rest of his life. If you met Shane for 5 minutes, you left that conversation feeling like you knew the dude, and he was your friend. He was one of those magnetic, once-in-a-lifetime people, which is why I make the pilgrimage every year to Palisades, Tahoe to pay my respects to Shane, while emceeing McConkey PMS. It's the highlight of the year for me, as I try to channel my inner Shane and have a lot of fun on the mic. And this thing takes place at arguably the best mountain in the country, or the world, Palisades, Tahoe. And I need to thank Matt Peterson for really taking care of me and my son while we were at Palisades. You may know Matt from being on episode 231 of this podcast. He was running Woodward when he was on the podcast, but since then, Matt has leveled up again, and now he's the senior marketing director at Palisades, and he made my son and my Tahoe experience the best one yet. I've been going there a lot, and I've never had more fun than this year. Thank you, Matt, and I can tell you that even with the big crowds on the weekends, Palisades managed to spread the crowds out, and we rarely waited in lift lines. It was awesome. And you heard me mention my son. Well, before we had him, my wife and I were at a wedding. Ange was like 8 months pregnant, and we were sitting at a table with Shane and Sherry McConkey and what seemed to be the rest of the Red Bull Air Force. I had worked with Shane at that time at K2, so we knew each other, but my wife had never met him. She had just heard stories from me. Shane must have had his hands on Ange's stomach for like 30 minutes that night, being all kinds of funny. Like, oh, there's a baby in there. Can you believe Powell did this? And just so many things that he was saying and doing in such an endearing way that my wife, like everyone else in the world, just thought Shane was an incredibly awesome human. A couple of days later, we were talking about what to name our son. We had already picked out Keaton as his first name, but we really weren't sure what his middle name was going to be. And out of the blue, Ange was like, how about we name him Shane for his middle name? And our reasoning was how great Keaton Shane Powell sounded, and our inspiration was Shane that night messing with her belly. So my kid is partially named after McConkey, and this is going to be a special trip. And the coolest part is that my kid recognized that. A couple of days before heading to Palisades, I overhear him on the phone talking with a buddy, saying that he's going to Lake Tahoe to celebrate his namesake. And he had no idea what he was in for. So my plan with this trip is always to MC the event in the spirit of Shane, to be right on the line and not cross it. And then, when I'm not on the mic, I'm going to be recording funny or not so funny Shane stories with people, because while Shane is no longer with us, he did so much funny shit. I mean, he was doing something funny every single day, and it lives mostly in people's heads. And my goal is to tell more funny stories every year until I can't get any fresh stories to tell you guys. Well, that sounds like it should be an easy thing to do because everybody has something to say about McConkey. It never is, and I always end up stressing. This year was no different. But before I dive into it, I want to ask you to do 2 easy things for me. First, please tell a friend about the show. Podcasts are hard to find, and telling people who you know will like the show really helps it grow. So please do that for me. And finally, I want to ask you to support my amazing sponsors. Being that the ski season is almost over, and it's time to think about summer, the best way to keep your ski legs going year-round are by getting yourself a pair of inline skates. And Rollerblade is back sponsoring the podcast again, and they make the best inline skates on the entire planet. Inline skating is so much fun. It's much better for your knees compared to running. It's much better for your wallet compared to getting on a bike. So check out Rollerblade's inline skates, and you'll be able to stay in shape and have more fun than you ever possibly could have imagined. I also want to thank my other amazing sponsors who make this show happen. They are Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Elon Skis, Best Day Brewing, and Stanley. Now, it's time to take you through my Palisades PMS experience. So Keaton and I get to Tahoe, we check in the hotel, and I let Keaton know that today we're just gonna chill. We'll start seeing people tomorrow. But really, when you get to a village like Palisades and you know a lot of people in town and coming into town, chilling is a hard thing to do. So within an hour or so, we're at Plumpjack with Lotsie Hawk and reigning PMS champion Wendy Fisher. This was Keaton's first test. How is he going to do with meeting all of these people that he knows are badasses? Was he going to be a talker or climb into his shell? Well, the first thing that Keaton does is ask Lotsie Hawk about his favorite skateboarders, and Lotsie happens to know all of them since they were about 13 years old. And the funny thing is, I told Keaton that maybe the first thing we do is not bring up skateboarding and skateboarders to Lotsie, because who wants to talk about someone's ex-husband? It's not a comfortable conversation. I don't even like bringing it up in this podcast, but I am just to give you a little background on what we were doing. So Lotsie was an absolute champion, answering every question that Keaton had and then sharing beta that she had that he hadn't even thought to ask. It was so cool of her, and Lotsie, thank you so much for being awesome to my kid. And while Lotsie was talking to Keaton, I was busy shooting the shit with Wendy Fisher. Actually, I was just pissing Wendy off by telling her that I thought she was going to win again. While Wendy is a badass, she doesn't like hearing that she's good at things. She's like, Powell, shut up. I'm not going to win. We actually put a bet on it. I bet $1 that I thought she would win. She bet $1 that she thought she wouldn't win, and she owes me $1, which I haven't received yet. So I annoyed Wendy for a little bit longer, and then I started asking her and Lotsie for some McConkey stories to get for my podcast that I'm putting out. But they weren't ready to tell McConkey stories yet. But I ran into Palisades transplant Gregory Brown, and I asked him if he had a funny Shane story. And while Gregory didn't have a funny one, the story he told of meeting Shane completely changed his life. Now, you grew up on the East Coast, but you have a McConkey story. What's yours?
I did. I grew up near the Dartmouth College area.
Okay.
And I was working at a shop called Golf and Ski Warehouse back in 99. The Volant rep comes in on a Tuesday night, I think, and he's like, you got to skip school tomorrow, which I did anyway, and go up and check out the Volant booth because Shane's going to be there demoing his new machetes. And I was like, you sold me. I was already there. So I get up there, stoked, meet the man, and I got to ski with him for about an hour, you know? The machetes ripped, of course, and just couldn't keep up with him in any bumps at all. I was just in awe. It's like, holy shit. But I got to have lunch with him, and my life changed from there. I think I crossed paths with him at Mount Snow that following January, where the X Games were, and I just remember that being like a pivotal moment.
So are you saying that you're here now because of meeting Shane that Wednesday?
Kind of. Back, when the foundation started, I'd been songwriting for a while and came up with this song called Ski Like a Ninja, dedicated to Shane back then. And I emailed it to Sherry in tribute and got to come out. I think I met you briefly there at 2012. I played that song on the K2 deck amidst everybody, just going off, and been a real good, strong supporter of this cause for about a decade now.
So meeting Shane had such an impact on Gregory that he decided to move his life to the Pali Valley. And what's so crazy about that is there must be at least 100 other transplants with that exact same story. Shane was a fucking magnet, and he attracted people from everywhere to come to the Pali Valley. He was also cut from a different cloth. With most people, me included at times, when I don't like something, I sit on my ass and I complain about it. When Shane didn't like something, he did something about it, and that something was usually going to be a shit ton of fun. While the PMS is the most fun event in skiing in a world without Shane, it started when Shane was alive, and his good friend Uncle E takes us back to that original PMS. So Uncle E, first time this event happens, Shane McConkey's alive. He's starting this thing. Tell me what happens when you guys are at the top of the mountain.
I'm going to back it up. Shane came up with this concept that he wanted everything to be different than what was going on because there was big mountain events, there was all the half pipe, all the X Games stuff was coming out. So he wanted to come up with an event that was different than the rest. So there was a Switch GS, there was a small air, not a big air, and you could do it on anything but skis and a snowboard. So from saucers to ski bikes and all this random stuff. And I think like 2 hot dogs was the prizes you'd win, just crazy stuff. And then there was the downhill, but the fruit boot downhill is what it was called. Okay. So Shane gets up to the top. We take the tram up and get to the top there. Shane becomes he's the face of the games, of course, and he's also the starter of the event. So there's about 60 people. You have to sign up as an alias, and you didn't have to be in costume, but people were. And so Shane gets up there. He's like, okay, there are no rules, and just go on my count. 3, 2, and on 2, he skates away ahead of everybody else. No one was ready. They were waiting for 1, and Shane got a good jump on it because there was no rules. So that was typical Shane fashion, and he did make it down to the bottom, and he did win his own event.
Saturday is game day, the day of the PMS downhill, where the prize of the Golden Saucer is one of the most coveted trophies in sport. The event itself was absolute pandemonium on short skis. Think 60 snowbladers decked out in costume, I would say with ice water pumping through their veins, but really, who knows what's being pumped through the veins of the competitors. Everyone has their eyes on that Golden Saucer, and half of everyone's eyes looks like they are saucers, which means this thing is serious, and everyone was getting into the zone. At the end of the day, Wendy Fisher and Donnie Peltier took home the Golden Saucers and bragging rights for a year. After the event, I met up with a former competitor who's on the sidelines right now, Greg Lindsey, to talk about his current status, and also adding a little beta to what Uncle E shared about the origins of this event. Greg Lindsey, it's been a tough year for you. You've got a broken leg or a messed up knee or something like that, and tons of snow. What does that do to you when you can't shovel and you can't do anything and you're stuck?
It turns into just a whole lot of sitting on the couch watching other people ski and realizing how much better of a skier I am than them. And that's hard.
And, speaking of better skiers than you, one would be Shane McConkey, and he might have been better than a lot of things than you. And I don't know, I'm just saying that because it's McConkey Day. But you have a great McConkey story that you're going to share with us. Why don't you share?
Yeah, so back in 2003, I just graduated high school, and Shane decided to put on the first ever Pain McChlonky. Rules for entry were basically like, drink as many Red Bulls as you want, make up a name, and do the saucer small air, the Switch GS, and the downhill. And Shane had a funny way of making rules that applied to himself. So as we're lined up waiting for the final race to come down, Shane's standing in front of us and is kind of like going over some rules, and then Shane just leaves and starts going. And everyone's kind of looking around, and it's like, oh, wait, we're racing. And it was the first one down to the chamois. He had to drink a pitcher of beer. Aaron McGovern was the winner. I just love that about Shane, and it's carried over to all these other PMSs because it's just like, what are the rules? Well, there are no rules. First one to the bottom.
So Greg's recollection almost lines up with Uncle E's, so I'm going to take that as that's how things started, even though I'm sure both of those guys have very foggy memories of the truth. But no, I totally believe them. But really, this event carries on because of Sherry McConkey. And Sherry is so much more than just Shane McConkey's wife. I mean, think about it. Shane was an all-time rad dude. He was incredible. And you can bet a dude like that was going to find his equal in his partner. And he sure did with Sherry. She's the perfect yin to his yang. She's one of the strongest women that I know, and she's so talented in so many things. But the one thing that really stands out to me is how she's been a lightning rod for the community. It's like she builds all these fun, inclusive events that foster community, but she always has a cause behind it. And these days, the Shane McConkey Foundation has given over $1 million to the Eco Challenge and other great causes. And I've read that Shane was super into animals. So I decided to ask Sherry a little bit about that, and I got a lot more than just talking about animals.
The reason we're here is because we are at a terrible day today. It's the anniversary of your husband's death, which sucks. And I hate to say it like that, but that's how it is.
Yeah.
And his legacy is something that you've helped foster and create because he loved animals. And you were about to tell me a story about when his dad wanted to make him shoot animals. And I'm sure that probably plays into why he loved animals and why that like comes into the Eco Challenge and all
That's
that
why
stuff.
I love him.
Yeah. So where were you going with that story?
Okay, so when he was, I don't know which age he was, but it was between 11 and 13. His dad bought him a gun to learn how to shoot animals. And so his dad's like, go out and shoot some animals. And so his first thing was a blue jay, and his second thing was another bird. And he shot them, and he didn't feel too much remorse. But then he saw a marmot, and he shot the marmot, and he killed her. And he went up to get the marmot to show his dad. And as he picked her up, all these little animals came out, all these little baby marmots came out. Yeah. And he went back to his dad and handed him the gun and said, I will never shoot animals again.
So after listening to that clip, I think it's safe to say that I had a few beers in me. And while I've been on a huge diet of Best Day Brewing throughout the daytime events at the McConkey, at nighttime, I was drinking the alcoholic stuff. And go figure, I can hear it in my voice. I should also mention that with this podcast, I'm not putting everything in chronological order like I usually do, as I recorded at so many random times, and it was easier for me to put together a podcast this way. So Shane's dad, Jim McConkey, taught Shane that he didn't want to kill animals. And while Jim wasn't in Shane's life as much as most parents, it should be noted that Jim was a badass himself, and Sherry talks about it.
People may not know that Shane's dad is like a guy that I think a chairlift is named for at
2.
Park City maybe was one. Whistler is the other. And he's Jim McConkey. But he wasn't totally involved in Shane's life. But who was Jim McConkey?
I mean, Jim McConkey is an amazing guy. He looks just like Shane. He's an incredible athlete. You can see where Shane got a lot of his skills from.
But his mom was badass too. Let's not
his
deny
mom's
that.
just as amazing. So both the genes made
Like
an
super
incredible
talented
man.
athletes, both of
Very.
them.
Yes. Shane's dad wasn't very present for a lot of Shane's life. And I can't figure out between both of them who was at fault here because you had two different stories, you know. So no pointing fingers. Shane loved his dad and he loved his mom and he was a great kid to them both. Yeah.
But Jim was a fucking legend.
He's a legend and he still is. There was just a picture of him, Junior Benoose and Jim were skiing in Utah. They're both 90. Jim's 96, Junior's 97. And they were skiing in Utah, ripping.
So when we think about like the McConkey legacy, Jim probably thought he was a very important person in the whole ski world. And Shane probably never thought he was an important person. But when you look at the history of skiing, it's like both of those guys had so much of an impact in the whole entire sport.
Right.
And that's pretty fucking crazy.
Well, and if you see Jim's history, like he's got incredible stories with Stein Eriksen, Warren Miller, you know, every single legend in the ski industry. Jim is with these guys skiing and everything about that generation is all still good friends. And Jim's one of the few that are left. And he's such a legend. He still plays golf every single day, 19 holes, walks the course.
So the McConkey name is like Dick Barrymore, Warren Miller. He
Once-
probably wasn't in the stumpy stuff.
No.
But then it goes to MSP. And that's when Shane starts. And it just like keeps going and going. And that's a pretty fantastic
It
thing.
is pretty amazing.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm stoked that Rollerblade is back as a sponsor. I have a long history with inline skates, and out of all the skates I've tried, nothing compares to the quality and support of a Rollerblade inline skate. And the reason I feel this way is because of the support the skates offer. Whether you're skating one of their hard boot models that offers maximum support, or one of their soft boot models that offers support where you need it, you're going to find that Rollerblade branded skates don't get soft and overflex like the competition. And that's something that you can see and feel while you're skating. This is the brand that invented the sport, and the products they make are second to none. Ski season may be coming to an end, but that's no excuse to get out of ski shape. Inline skating is the only sport that will keep you there, and it doesn't matter how much you ride your $10,000 bike or how much you run, nothing gets or keeps you in ski shape like inline skating. And the best way to do that is to pick up a pair of Rollerblade inline skates and download the Rollerblade Ski to Skate app, which has a training program that'll keep you at your best. You can find out about all things Rollerblade and their app over at rollerblade.com. Next up, it's a place that you can get your Rollerblade branded inline skates and your Elon skis. I'm talking about Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. The best online shopping experience in snow, in my opinion. Why are they so great? Because Peter Glenn does it all. Online, they have the best deals on the internet, and they offer free shipping on orders over $50, a no-hassle return policy that makes things easy to send back if you have to, and that's really important to me. You don't want to be hassled when you're returning a product. And what separates Peter Glenn from those internet-driven companies looking for the biggest profits is that Peter Glenn is really a mom-and-pop retail establishment, and they've been getting people out on snow for over 65 years. And when you're in their stores, you're going to find all the brands, all the products, and a lot of passionate, knowledgeable people who want to help get you dialed in for your next adventure. On top of that, Peter Glenn's going to price match. If you find what you want at another reputable website or store for a lower price, let the good folks know at Peter Glenn and they're going to match that price. So please do that for me, and before you look elsewhere to outfit your adventure, head on over to peterglenn.com. My final sponsor this round is Elan Skis. And if you haven't noticed, Elan is building a cult following here in the States on the basis of their Ripstick line. I personally ski on the Ripsticks 96 Black Edition and the Ripsticks 106, and I will tell you that I noticed a difference in my skiing on day one. It's amazing how light and playful these skis can be while also remaining rock solid in the turn and at high speeds. It's the quality that I've come to expect from skis built in the Slovenian Alps. But what really separates Elan from its competition is their factory. They built a solar power plant on top of their state-of-the-art building, and this, combined with independence from fossil fuels, will provide a carbon sink as powerful as 15,000 trees on an annual basis. While a lot of brands are saying they are making a difference when it comes to the environment, Elan is really putting their money where their mouth is. To find out more about all things Elan, head on over to elanskis.com. Those are my sponsors. Now I'm going to take you back to event day. Roy Tuscany, Reverend Rusty Reams, and myself were on the mics and wheels of steel creating a laugh-out-loud live show, and when it was over, I realized that it was time for me to start getting a bunch of interviews and stories or I wouldn't have a podcast for next Monday. As a lot of you know, I've been going through a bunch of shit lately, and every week it seems like a struggle to get a show out, but I never miss one. And to get content for this one, I had to go to a few random folks who are great friends of Shane for some stories. The first of which is not random at all. It's Jamie Burge, a former pro skier and 5'1" badass who seems like such a fun person. Jamie felt bad about not getting me a story last year, so she decided to share the story about the last time she saw Shane alive.
Yeah, well, last time I saw McConkey, I was just walking down downtown Truckee with my girlfriend at the time, and all of a sudden Shane pops out of Bar of America. Is like, Bertie! And Shane, and he was just getting ready to do like a Red Bull photo shoot. They were going to skydive out of the Truckee airport. And he's like, I'm just going to mess up a bunch of times so I could just keep on doing it over and over again. Just typical Shane style. Nice. And that was the last time I saw him. So, yeah, it's not a super funny, but, just him and his zaniness. And
that's how he was.
Yeah, that's how he was. And, yeah, I'm sure he messed it up multiple times so he could jump out of the airplane for free.
Yep.
Many, many times.
When I think about a story like that, about Red Bull and Shane getting 10 times more jumps than he was supposed to get, I think about who was signing off on all that. And in the gravy days of Red Bull, while the brand was catching fire and it felt like the Wild West with budgets, the puppet master behind the scenes back then was another Powell Movement alum, Paul Crandall, or LP as he's known. And LP tells a story about a talent that Shane had, and when Shane taught it to him, his wife, and Sherry at a restaurant.
All right, I ran into Paul Crandall, LP. He's been on the podcast. He knew Shane McConkey, and he's got a great McConkey story for us.
Oh, this one's funny. Me, Sherry, Shane, and my wife went out to dinner at a place called Moody's one night, and we probably had a little too much wine, but, there's never enough wine, right? And so Shane had done that spaghetti thing up his nose, so we decided let's just all do it. And so all of us are at the table. We're snorting spaghetti up our nose and pulling it out of our mouths and doing the whole spaghetti through the nose and out the mouth trick. And it was super funny. And we laughed our asses off. And just a fond memory of that old guy, man. I miss him already.
And is that one of those things that anybody can do? You just snort up?
Yeah, it's super easy. You just literally, you got to commit, but you got to close one nostril, you got to shove it in there, and you really got to snort it through so it gets in the back of your throat, and then you got to give the proverbial like, and you cough it out, but you'll get it. And then you reach back there, have your friend reach back there and grab that sucker, and then you can do the spaghetti out the nose in the mouth trick. It works every time.
I hope everybody tries that party trick that Paul learned from Shane McConkey, and after getting that one from LP, I realized that I was way behind on getting stories, and if I was going to get a good podcast for this week, I was really going to have to sniff these stories out. And that meant harassing strangers to see if they knew Shane. Thankfully, Britt, one of Sherry's amazing volunteers at the Shane McConkey Foundation, steered me in the right direction by saying things like, go talk to that person. And whenever she would say that, I would interrupt someone's conversation, ask them if they knew Shane well, and if they said yes, I'd harass them for a story. And Katie Benty shares a quick one about Shane's grooming habits.
We're sitting here looking up the KT chair. Katie has a story about Shane McConkey that she's almost shy to tell me because she doesn't want to throw other people under the bus, but she's going to. So let's get this story.
Actually, it has nothing to do with KT, and it has nothing to do with anybody else. I remember the day when Shane discovered that he started having back hair, and he decided that he needed to start shaving his shoulders. And he came over to Rob McCormick's house, and he was so distraught because all of a sudden it didn't like magically disappear after the shaving. It was sprouting back in even greater tufts. And that's my hairy back Shane McConkey story.
All right, there we go.
I can't believe that Shane was one of those guys that would shave their shoulders or their back or their chest hair. If you were thinking about doing that, rethink your plan. Have you ever seen those dudes with their shirts off and they have swirly hair all over their bodies? Well, that's because they shaved their hair once, and when it grows back, it never looks the same. So shaver, beware. I wonder if one of Shane's BFFs, Scott Gaffney, shaves his chest or back hair. Actually, I don't wonder that at all. I'm just looking for a good transition to get to this epic story from Gaffney. So here we go.
Sitting here with Scott Gaffney, we are looking up at Palisades right now on McConkey Day, and you have a story that you haven't shared with me about McConkey, and you're going to share it, so let's hear what you got.
You know, it's hard to pick one out of all the time we had together, but one funny story is Shane and I came back from a little climbing venture one day, and we were swinging by a former roommate's house, Rob McCormick, and Rob wasn't around, and we decided, let's go into his house and mess with things. And Rob's a really anal type of person. Everything's neat. Okay. So we got into his house. We started by, turning pictures upside down, whatever it might be. We put some lotion and a bunch of handkerchiefs or whatever, napkins on his bed with a porn mag that we found in his place. And then we saw a picture of his parents in a frame, and Shane dropped his pants, put the picture of Rob's parents, like his mom and dad, smiling away right in front of his junk. And then I took a Polaroid of it with Rob's Polaroid camera, and we put that on his fridge, and then we left the house.
That is amazing.
And, it's just one of those everyday things that you don't think it's something you're going to remember that many years later, but here we are. That was probably like 2005 or something. Good times with Shane every day.
I love that story. Who does that kind of shit? I mean, I get making the whole joke, but the thing that separated Shane was the level that he took the joke. I can't imagine ever getting naked and letting a friend take a picture of anything next to my junk. I mean, call me a prude or something, but I've never taken a dick pic and texted it to anyone before, even my wife. And there's no way I would have a Polaroid of my junk out in the wild. Speaking of Polaroids, my next story comes from Chris Davenport. He wasn't at the event. He was at the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame inductions, celebrating people like Mike Hattrup and Kent Kreitler and Barrett Christie and Tina Dixon and Terry Kidwell and a whole bunch of others. So congratulations to everyone that made it into this year's Hall of Fame class and last year's, as I believe that was inducted this year as well. But back to Dav, and when I was stressing about getting enough content for this podcast, I reached out to some lifelines. And Dav was one of them, and he brings up some Powell Movement-inspired stories that also involve Shane's trusty Polaroid camera.
I was thinking about this as I was traveling the other day, and I've got a couple ones, but they're appropriate in that your wonderful podcast is called The Powell Movement. So, Shane had a fascination with the other movement, We spent a lot of time in hotel rooms together over the years at competitions and certainly filming for Matchstick Productions. And one time early on, this was in the 90s, I want to say 98 or 99 perhaps, filming for Matchstick, we were sharing a hotel room in Valdez, Alaska. And there was quite a few down days. This was in the days when we all carried Polaroid cameras up into the mountains to take pictures of our lines so that when we got to the top, we could sort of look at that Polaroid and see our landmarks in our line and kind of know exactly where we were going to go. And Shane loved taking pictures. And one of the things that he decided he was going to do on this particular trip is take a Polaroid of his morning ritual in the bathroom. And so by the end of the trip, he had taped together a series of Polaroid portraits of his morning duties, if you will, on the wall so that I could be impressed or he could just show up. And God, it gives me goosebumps. And I'm really laughing because every morning I would wake up and he would be like, check this one out. He'd be so fired up and tape it onto the wall. And I'd have to walk past it as I was exiting the hotel room to go skiing. And God, he would just get such a kick out of it. So that was sort of the beginning with my understanding of his obsession with these types of things. And he carried that with him down to Portillo, Chile, where Shane was one of the founding coaches of my Superstars ski camp back in 2003. And after a number of years, he was able to bring his wife, Sherry, and his daughter, Ayla, down to the camp. Can't remember exactly what year that was, but maybe 08 or 09. Anyway, Ayla was a baby. I think she was like 1,
okay,
or maybe just 2. So she was still in diapers and in daycare at Portillo during the day while we were all out coaching and shredding. And Sherry was there. It was awesome. And, Shane being the practical jokester that he always was right till, his final day, he was always playing pranks on people. And we all had so much fun with that. But this prank was particularly smelly. He, at the end of our ski camp, wrapped up one of Ayla's poopy diapers and stashed it away in the luggage of my other coach, Chris Anthony. And Chris flew internationally home to the great state of Colorado and got back to Vail and went to unpack his luggage with it had a certain aroma to it after being in transit for 24 hours. And sure enough, he had a gift from Shane's daughter, Ayla, with him in Vail, Colorado.
Oh, man, that is amazing.
So I thought both of those stories would be appropriate for just kind of the theme of Shane and his love of all things jokes and practical jokes and general, poop.
You know what's awesome about that story? It's that Dav thought about that one and decided to tie his funny story into the name of my podcast. And for those of you that haven't figured it out yet, the name The Powell Movement is a poop joke. And Shane seemed to love pranks involving poop. And with my podcast's namesake, I was fishing for more poop-related stories, and I found another good one that reminds me of what happened in one of Dav's stories. So this is my last event day interview. I met up with hairstylist to the ski superstars, a woman who is known for putting her blood, sweat, and tears into building the Truckee Bike Park. Like everyone in Palisades, she's all about the community, and she gets after it. And Courtney Newston had this story to share.
We went climbing, and it was probably 3 months after Shane had a hip surgery. And this is, post 8 knee surgeries, hip surgery. So we were with a group of people and we all drove down and we were near River Rock, near Reno. And none of us had really been there. So we were all kind of on a venture, and there was some pro climber that was with us, Annie. And we get down to the bridge, which is a cable bridge. We all cross it and we make it safe. And then we get to this spot. And none of us really know where the ropes are to be tied or anything. And Sherry's partially blind, so she didn't know where it was. And I had only been there once, so Sherry was like, "Where is it?" And Shane's like, "Well, I'm not even supposed to be climbing right now." And so Annie said, "Okay, I'll set up rope, but will you belay me?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't really know how to belay." And Shane and JT were like, "Well, I probably shouldn't be here either. I mean, I don't really know what I'm doing either." And so anyway, we had a great climbing day. Annie led the route, and I was belaying. JT and Shane and I were kind of on a team. And then 2 o'clock rolled around and I had to go back to work. But those guys wanted to keep climbing. So I said, well, JT, just take this is JT Holmes, take my ropes and all my stuff and just bring it back and I'll pick it up at Sherry's house tomorrow or the next day. And they said, okay. And so I grabbed my backpack and I rolled out of there. And this is right after Shane and Sherry had Ayla. And Ayla was probably, I don't know, maybe 7 months old, 6 months old. And Ayla was like sitting in like a little baby seat or whatever while we were climbing. Anyway, I get home and the next day I open up my backpack and JT and Shane had put Ayla's diaper in my backpack. Joke on me.
Awesome, that's great.
It's time for my final round of sponsors, and I'm going to start things off with Best Day Brewing. Over the years, sure, I've enjoyed drinking beer, maybe a little too much sometimes. I mean, once it hits your lips, it tastes so good. But these days, I have so much to do, and I need a beer that doesn't slow me down. That's where Best Day comes into my life. While I still drink alcoholic beer, I'm finding that most days, I just want the IPA flavor and not the alcohol. And with Best Day, I found that their hazy IPA and their Kolsch have just as much, if not more, flavor than the alcoholic versions. And I've done blind taste tests on my friends. None of them knew the difference when I handed them a pint of Best Day. And after we had 3 or 4 beers at my taste test, all my friends were psyched when I let them know that they weren't consuming alcohol and everyone could drive home. While I'm not asking you to quit drinking, I know that most of us would be better off slowing down, and Best Day is the perfect choice for doing that. So next time you're at the store, please pick up a 6-pack of Best Day and support the beer that supports me. And if you can't find Best Day at your local grocer, head on over to bestday.com and orders over $50 get free shipping. My final sponsor is a brand that you should pour your Best Day brewing in. I'm talking about Stanley, another iconic Seattle brand that has been ahead of the curve since 1913. While we all know Stanley for creating that iconic green bottle that kept your grandpa's coffee hot all day long, they still do that and a lot more these days. They're still all about adventure. They're still all about keeping your beverages hotter or colder than any other product ever created. And I know this because I've been given just about every water bottle on the planet, and nothing comes close to what I found in Stanley. And Stanley has always been the right choice when it comes to the planet. If you're still using single-use plastics for your beverages, it's time to make a change, and I'm making it easier than ever to do that. You're going to save 30% on all your Stanley products when you head on over to stanley1913.com and go shopping. I highly recommend picking up a water bottle and a set of pint glasses. When you check out, enter the code DRINKFAST, that's all lowercase, all one word, and you're going to save 30%, and that's the best deal you're going to find anywhere on Stanley products. So those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. So that takes us through event day, and at this point I am stressing. I don't have enough content to create a whole show. I do have some emails out to some lifelines, so I know more stuff will be coming in, and there's a chance I can record more at the High Fives Foundation's signature event, the Mothership Classic, that's happening the next morning, Sunday at Palisades Tahoe. But that really wasn't going to happen, as I had my kid with me, and my kid loves to skateboard, and one of the things that they have in Tahoe is a Woodward, and if I didn't take Keaton there, he would have been super bummed. And I wanted this to be a trip of a lifetime for him. So I sacrificed that time I had in the morning to get interviews so we could do a 2-hour session at Woodward. And when I say we, Keaton skated. And while I could have brought out my blades, after skiing hard a couple of days and having a couple more to go, I didn't want to aggravate my angry knee any more than I already have. While my knee's structurally okay, after a few days of shredding, it always starts to feel like it's packed with gravel and it gets really sore and really tight. And the last thing I needed to do was to try things at Woodward, which I totally would have done. So Keaton sessioned the foam pits, the concrete park, and the pump track, and he loved Woodward Tahoe. I can't imagine what he's going to think when he gets to Seek Skate Camp this summer and sees how big their parks are, but that's a story for another time. So we do Woodward, we get out of there, and we go lap the KT chair during the Mothership Classic. It's an amazing event with so many people lapping and lapping the KT chair, raising money for people who have had life-altering injuries. It's amazing what the High Fives Foundation does for people. When the event's over, we attend the award ceremony, and while I should have been working on content on the sun deck, I was slacking. So my last chance to get some good stuff, outside of my last lifeline, is going to be to get a few stories at Sherry McConkey's house on Sunday night. She's cooking dinner for a good group, and this is pretty much my last chance to grab some good stuff. And luckily, I caught up with JT Holmes as he was leaving and rushing out to another dinner he had to be at. I'm standing here with JT Holmes. He's super late to meet his family for dinner, and JT Holmes is always super late for everything that he does. So this is kind of normal, right, JT?
Yeah, medium late, yep.
So there we go. So JT, what the fuck are COVID toes?
COVID toes. Look it up. COVID toes are a symptom similar to chilblains, which is kind of grade 1, grade 0.5 mild frostbite, but has nothing to do with frostbite. It's a symptom of COVID 4 to 6 weeks after you get it, and it's red toes, burning, itching sensation, which I know you're familiar with.
Yeah, well, thank you. That was very nice and quick on you. So, like, so bad that you'd have to, like, pull over and, like, massage your toes on the side of the road?
Yeah.
It hurt that bad?
Yeah, you're just kind of thinking, wow, what's going on? My toes hurt, they burn, they don't really itch, but something's wrong.
So 5 days and done is what I heard on that, and that was great. Yeah, for you. Uh-huh. And then Shane McConkey, now we're going to get into those kind of things. I asked you to think of a story that people haven't heard about, and have you thought about anything or can spit anything out right now?
Oh, my gosh. I mean, there's so many. The
Obscure
gay staring contest that escalated into somewhat of a touchy-feely situation between Tamarick and Shane. I mean, there's that one. There's Gnarly Charlie when we were base jumping from the bridge in Lake Orville. This was for either Shane's or Miles' bachelor party, and the cops came, and we had parachutes drying out on the bank of the river, and the cops, I just thought we're red-handed, so I just said, yep, it was us. We were base jumping off the bridge. And these cops look at us and they just say, you can't base jump off that bridge. It's too low. And they wouldn't believe me that I was forthcoming with the truth. But they wanted to arrest somebody who had jumped off the bridge without a parachute because that's reckless endangerment or something. So finally, they were pressing me for who jumped off the bridge. I told them it was Charlie, and they said, Charlie who? And I said, I don't know. We just know the guy's Gnarly Charlie. And then they said, well, where did he go? And I said, he took off on a boat. What color was the boat? Black. Had one of those wakeboard towers with the speakers. Okay, so for the rest of the day, anybody who had a black wakeboard boat with a tower was getting pulled over. And they were looking for Charlie.
Nice. JT, you can go home.
Okay,
Thank you very much. So I think JT started to talk about telling a McConkey story, but then he decided to tell one about himself. Whatever. When I finished recording with JT, I realized that I had Wendy Fisher and Sherry McConkey at Sherry's house, and I needed to get some stories from both of them. I played Sherry's stories earlier in the podcast, and really, Sherry's stories and Dav's stories are the only ones in this podcast that I posted out of chronological order. The only truth to that statement where I thought I posted everything out of chronological order earlier is that I had a few beers and I had a pretty good buzz going when I got these interviews. And I can hear that in my voice and my demeanor. That's kind of embarrassing to me, but whatever, that's podcasting. So Wendy and I are sitting in Shane McConkey's office and talking about all the memorabilia and one-off skis around us, and then Wendy gets into her Shane stories. Look at the walls here. Take a good look at all these pictures here because we're in Shane McConkey's office, which is pretty crazy that we're here on Shane McConkey's, like, the anniversary of his death, I think is the 26th of 2009, and we're at the 26th of 2023. I don't know what the math makes that, but we're looking at a wall that has original framed Shane McConkey posters, like the Nick Nixon stuff. Who is Nick Nixon? You know that guy?
Well, yeah, he's a filmer. That's first started with. Yeah.
That was like the first part of Shane McConkey's career?
I think so, yeah, with Kent Kreitler.
And then when we look up there, we've got the Shane McConkey Classic and the Payne McConkey Classic and Nar the movie and Alpine Rapture. Do you remember all these things, like how they happened in time?
Well, some, not all. Okay. But yeah, I mean, I used to have that circular poster, the Volant one, and Nar, I know that. But yeah, anyway.
You've known that guy forever.
Forever. But I know him in a personal sense, not like following his career, like this kind of stuff.
Okay, so when we look at the wall there and you see those skis that are made, and that's pretty important to like who that guy was, right?
Well, so it was funny because
Yeah.
I was here one Christmas holiday visiting my parents from Crested Butte, and there's a guy on the chairlift in front of us. And I looked at my husband, Woody, and I said, oh my God, that guy on the chairlift in front of us has jump skis on, water ski jump skis. And I was a water skier. I tricked, I slalomed, I jumped, I barefooted. So I knew what those were. And then we got off and I'm like, what the hell? And I ski up and I'm like, oh my God, it's Shane. And I'm like, Shane, what are you doing? He's like, check this out, Wendy. This is going to change everything. And it was a powder day. And he starts ripping in the powder on these jump skis.
And you saw it?
Yes. Then that's when he changed the ski technology, of that generation.
Did you understand it? Because you were a water skier at the time. Did you understand the whole, like, wow, that actually works after you saw him make it work?
No, I didn't pay attention to any of that.
Okay.
I didn't think as hard as him like that.
Okay. You were more just like a pure athlete,
I
right?
was like skiing along, like, okay, whatever. And then he progressed into changing it, but I didn't know what he was after, So, yeah, he was genius like that.
I mean, we're looking at a ski called the Mick Chub. I mean, we've heard of the Chub. Everybody's heard of the Volant Chub, but that one's graphic, the Mick Chub. I haven't heard of that before, ever. And then we've got the spatula, I think, in there. And is the machete the one in the middle right there? It looks like it is,
Yes, the machete.
So there we go. So he was like a game-changing person. Yeah, you see the machete, the spatula.
Yeah.
But you grew up with him, and you saw him your whole entire life. And he was a funny guy. We've talked about that so much. And you have a couple funny stories. So I might as well just cue you up and just go ahead, Wendy.
So these stories weren't totally from our youth, but, Chris Davenport started a camp in Portillo, Chile. And he invited myself, Chris Anthony, and Shane McConkey to be the first coaches for Skiing with the Superstars. I don't know if it was year 3 or 4, but anyway, there was a restaurant in Portillo that served sushi. So I think it was the last night or one of the nights we'd all sit in there and have sushi as one of the meals. And we had a ton of sushi. We had some leftover pieces, and then there's a guy who managed a vineyard in Santiago, and then the snow safety guide and a bunch of employees. Like, they all come in. They had just been drinking a ton of wine. All their lips and teeth are red from drinking lots of wine. They're very cheery. They sat down kind of in our whole area, but, we were all winding down from eating. And Shane's like, watch this. And he packed up a huge wasabi ball, stuffed it underneath the fish, and there's like 5 pieces. And so we pass it around, and all of us campers and coaches, like, we knew what was going on, but we pass it over to the new people who just showed up, our friends, and we see them go, okay, cool. Thank you for offering your fish that's still around, your sushi. And we knew which one had the wasabi ball. So we see everyone grabbing a piece, and we see the wine manager from Santiago grab the one with the wasabi, and he puts it in his mouth and he starts eating it. We just see his eyes explode open and like kind of do that pause thing of like, what's going on? And we're all snickering and laughing because we know what's going on. And his friends don't know what's going on because they're all drunk. But we just see this one guy just super intense all of a sudden and not knowing what to do. So that is just like one of the classic things that Shane would do to entertain us. That was creative and fun and somewhat harmless. So that's one story.
A very PG but amazing story,
Yes.
like the wasabi bomb might be pioneered right there by McConkey.
Oh, yeah. I mean, because that was a long, long, long time ago. And then the other story, I was going to CU for summer school and Shane was at CU. This is, obviously after high school. And a classmate of ours from Burke had a motorcycle and it was at nighttime. And I was on the motorcycle with him. So we're doubling. Shane was on rollerblades and this guy was driving up and down the streets in Boulder at night with Shane holding on the back of the motorcycle while he's on his rollerblades.
Really fast?
Yeah, we're just cruising along. I mean, there's potholes everywhere. And I remember looking back and seeing Shane right behind me holding on, just thinking like he could go down in any second, like catch a toe, catch a wheel on anything in that street. No
Just
helmet, nothing. Yeah.
Another solid story there. McConkey, the pioneer of the wasabi bomb, and maybe the pioneer of using inline skates to train for ski season. And after we chatted, Wendy did clarify that Shane was on rollerblade branded inline skates that night in college and every time she saw him skate. So that's a nice nod to one of my sponsors, but that's not all we get from Wendy Fisher. Her final story is all about close calls and Shane pushing her to do her first backflip.
All right, so Wendy Fisher, we were walking out the door and I was thanking you for all that you've helped for this podcast. But now you're like, oh, I've got another story and I'm not going to make you have a brain fart. So
I was filming in Valdez. I was with Dean and Shane and myself and the Matchstick crew. We ended up on a run that actually was not so safe and I skied down it, but I had to hike back up to Steve Winter because that's where the pickup zone was. And when I looked up, as I was hiking, an avalanche took me out and it was set on me. That's a whole nother story.
Covers you?
Well, I go tumbling down like 800 feet. I lose my skis. Anyway, I'm fine. I did the whole cover your mouth, put your hand up, fight. And
you think you're going to die kind of thing? Or
no, the weird thing is you think you're going to die before you ski a slope, hoping it doesn't avalanche. But when you're in the moment, I feel like you're just dealing. I did not feel a fear factor. I felt more like, all right, what are we going to do here? I got to cover my mouth. I got to put my hand up. I got to fight. And the main thing that I learned in it is the bottom part of the avalanche starts to slow down, but the upper part is still pushing you, which is why you get pushed with your head down a lot of times. So I started to feel my feet get locked in and my upper body getting pushed. And I felt like I became like a football player. I just threw my upper body against the snow to make sure I was not getting pushed down. And I have done that a few times in the few other avalanches I've been in. So it works. But I was lucky. There was no cliffs below me. There was no gnarly, crazy terrain. So I just buried from my waist down.
Okay.
But I was standing there with my hand over my mouth and my hand in the air. And I kind of was like, fuck yeah, I did it.
You make it out buried halfway.
Right.
But this isn't about a story about that. What's
No.
the McConkey part?
So anyway, I have no skis. We decide that conditions are not safe. So we fly into a zone and land the heli, and Shane decides he's going to build a kicker. And I happen to have the new twin tips when jib skis way back when those are just being produced.
Yeah.
Because of Mike Douglas and all those guys. Anyway, I had a pair.
Like 1080s?
Not 1080s yet. I don't know what they were called.
Okay.
But anyway, we fly back to Dean's cabin and I have these skis there. And why I brought these skis to Alaska, I have no idea. But
Right.
I go to the cabin, I get my little jib skis, return, and Shane has built this full-on kicker. And I show up and I'm like, Shane, what am I going to do? I'm like, how am I going to do this? He's like, you're going to do a backflip. And I'm like, a backflip? Okay, what do I do? And he goes, well, you just go down and you just throw your head back. And he's like, yeah, it's fine, Wendy. It's powder. You won't get hurt. So he goes and does a backflip. So I'm standing up there, scared shitless, thinking, oh my God, I can't believe I'm going to do this. But I could have just died in an avalanche and I didn't. So I might as well do this, right? So I head down and I hit the jump and I throw my head back and I just stall and I freaking land on my shoulders in his bomb hole. And he's right there. And he's like, oh, forgot about my bomb hole, because he was encouraged me to do it because it would be a soft landing no matter what.
Yeah.
But I end up in his
The
bomb
worst,
hole.
the only spot that would be bad.
Yeah. And I didn't make it over. And then he's like, oh, we got to throw your hips too. And I literally had never done a backflip before on a trampoline, nothing. So
Okay.
this is like, so I know nothing. I took him for his word. I threw my head back. I did nothing else.
And you just stopped and went just straight
Totally.
down. Yeah.
Yes. So I get back up there and I then go and do it again. And I just thrust my hips so hard forward and threw my head back. And I stomped my first backflip and it made it in the Matchstick movies. And I even did a few more after that. So that was Shane getting me to do my first backflip.
So Wendy brought up Mike Douglas and twin tips. And while Shane was pioneering in the big mountains, Mike was part of the new Canadian Air Force, and he had a huge part in developing the 1080, which makes Mike a pioneer as well. And while Mike and Shane weren't really competing against each other, they were peers and they were both pioneers, and I decided to reach out to Douglas, who's looked at as the godfather of the new school skiing movement, to share his best McConkey story. And go figure, it's another one that revolves around poop.
Shane had a poop obsession. And it was kind of weird, but it was also kind of Shane, and you couldn't help but laugh. But he would literally show up in any hotel in the world and clog the toilet. And he was kind of proud of it. I mean, we literally would, on the first day we'd check into a hotel room, we'd have to get the plunger and just have it there all the time. Well, first of all, he's very proud of his movements. And he would almost always take a photo if it was even remotely impressive. And he was always after the full coil to see if he could make the full loop connection. But where he was kind of weird and obsessive in his own way is that he was an obsessive wiper. Like he would wipe 10 times and essentially fill the bowl with toilet paper, which led to it being clogged. And without exaggeration, at least 4 or 5 times a week, the toilet would be clogged and have to be pumped to clear. So, Shane McConkey, full of shit.
Well, if you didn't know about Shane's obsession with poop, Douglas and Dav have spilled the proverbial beans about that crap, and after Mike dropped that story, it was time for me to speak to my final lifeline. And with this lifeline, I reached out to Heather Paul Featherman, who you may know as HP or Heather Paul from her pro skier days. And HP is going to take us back to Valdez and the invention of one of the most iconic characters in skiing. No, I'm not talking about Bobby Fenton. I'm talking about Saucer Boy. So let's jump into the story behind Saucer Boy. What happened in Valdez?
I think it had to be in 97 or 98. And, you know, this is kind of old school Valdez, like when it was first kind of getting all crazy and popular and everybody was up there filming and all the heli companies were coming to be. And we were up there, and I think I was up there filming No Man's Land. And of course, MSP was up there filming as they did. And I think it was the most epic string of weather days I have ever sat through in Alaska in my life. I think it was like 11 or 12 straight weather days, and people were just going off the rails. It was wacky. And, you know, we all kind of hung out together. It was a pretty small group, and it kind of started up in the Santa Lodge. And I remember us thinking it was a good idea to be more mature and drink some more interesting drinks. So we started drinking CC and ginger. I have no idea why, but I kind of feel like Shane was behind it because I was with Wendy and Morgan LaFawn, and we were up there stuck in a hotel room for days. So we started palling around with all those guys. Nobody could film. And God, we were all sitting around in the Sena just trying to kill time. And Shane came out totally geared up in, well, obviously everyone knows it now, but back then we're like, what are you doing? You know, we kind of like looked over like, oh, it's Shane, whatever. You know, he's doing something funny like always, you know, because he was just such a character. And, you know, we all just kind of didn't pay much attention to it. And then a few hours later, I remember just being down back in Valdez, like we were just killing time. We were causing so much trouble, just such derelicts back then and trying to kill time with all this alcohol. And I remember being down at the harbor on one of the boats and seeing Steve and Murray and the cameras rolling and Shane just coming flying off a snowbank into the water with the saucer, like fully into the bay. And we're all just half in the bag anyway. And it's like 10 at night and it's bright light. And oh my God, it was hilarious. And we laughed for days and nobody really had anything to do. And we would just follow him around town. Or you would just be walking around town late, coming back from the bar, and all of a sudden he'd fly down out of a snowbank. And he never broke character. I mean, I'm sure he did. I wasn't super tight with him, so we weren't all, you know, staying at the same place. But oh my God, when we were with him the entire week, he never broke character. And we all just kind of thought that was weird. And I remember not really hearing anything else about it until going to the MSP movie that next fall and just dying, like just having no idea the kind of traction it would have. And I just don't think anyone else would ever have brought that character to life. It was the funniest thing. And honestly, it was just like way too much wasted time, you know, not enough skiing, no exercise, way too much alcohol. And I think I got more of a stomach workout from laughing that week than I did from skiing. It was so funny. Just a lot of Jack Daniels. It's just so funny when I see it now. Whenever there's a reference to it or a costume, it just makes me think of standing at the harbor and watching him fly into the harbor. Just going, why would you ever do it? And just how funny it was at the time. And God, that was great. Those were good times. It's kind of loose up there then, that's for sure. Talk about staying power, huh?
Yeah, Saucer Boy will never die.
I know. I love that about it. It's so fantastic.
So that's part of the origin story of Saucer Boy. And I'm going to make sure to talk to Murray and Steve for next year's McConkey tribute so we can get even more of a backstory on that one, as I'm sure it exists. At this point, we're at the end of my McConkey tribute, but that's not the end of the trip or the podcast. See, there was one more really big reason to be at Palisades this weekend. There was a memorial for one of the best dudes I've had the chance to hang out with, Adam Balerijan. And Shane McConkey played a huge role in Adam Balerijan's life. See, Adam was a kid with cancer, a Make-A-Wish kid. And his wish was to ski with Shane McConkey. The whole Make-A-Wish thing happened, and Shane went above and beyond the call of duty for this. Yeah, he showed Adam the most incredible time in Tahoe, but he also kept in touch with him and encouraged him to move out when it was time. But that's not all Shane did for Adam. The coolest story about their relationship was the story about how Adam landed a marketing job at Palisades Tahoe. From what I heard at the memorial, Shane walked into the marketing offices and told them, hey, you're going to want to hire this Adam Balerijan fellow, and if you don't, I'm going to go ski for another mountain. So Adam ended up landing a job at marketing in Palisades. He worked there, he worked at the High Fives Foundation, and he was such a stoked human. He was the guy that you brought into the room, and he made everything more fun. He was so kind, and he seemed so happy, at least to me. But you know what? It's really hard to tell what's going on in anyone's head. Adam is no longer with us, and we celebrated his life at Palisades on Monday, and I believe we're going to do that every year on this weekend. And while the memorial was sad, it was also inspiring, and I realized that from Keaton, who had met Adam a couple of times and joined me at the memorial. We were in the car driving to the airport, and he was telling me how he had such an amazing trip and how he met so many cool people and how he got free pit vipers and how he was able to ski an incredible mountain. He was pumped. And I asked him what the worst part of the trip is. And I'm like, was it the memorial? And he's like, no, Dad, it wasn't. I thought it was going to be really sad. But everyone loved that guy so much. And when his brother gave that speech about when you're in doubt and you just need to dig deep and send it, well, that's what I need to do, Dad. At the skate park, hitting jumps, I just need to send it like Adam would have. And that was so incredible to hear. We're at this sad event with adults crying, and Keaton was able to leave with such a positive message. Thank you to the Balerijans for having the memorial. Thank you to Adam's brother Max and Adam's really good friend Roy Tuscany for some really moving speeches. And thank you to Adam for being such a good friend, even if we didn't see each other that much. I'm going to miss you, man. To everyone else out there, I know life isn't easy, and I know it's going to impact people in all different ways. And while I'm not telling you what to do with your life, if it ever comes to a point where you think there is no return, believe me, there are people who want to help. And I know asking for help is the hardest thing, but it can keep you alive. I really have nothing else to say about that. I miss Adam, I've missed Shane for a long time, and I'm glad that they both will not only not be forgotten, but it gives me comfort in knowing that they both will be celebrated every year. That's the podcast. I want to thank you for listening and ask you to please star rate and review me on any platform that you listen to me on. It really does help the show grow, and if I read your review on the podcast, you get a limited edition Powell Movement Puffin. Thank you for doing that. I also really want to thank Sherry McConkey, Ayla McConkey, and all of the wonderful volunteers at the Shane McConkey Foundation. I love that you keep including me every year and that I can be a small part of the big difference you are making in the world. I also want to thank Gregory Brown for letting me use his song Fly On Shane McConkey to take us out. And finally, please support my amazing sponsors. They are Rollerblade, Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Best Day Brewing, and Elon Skis. Have a great week, everyone.
Yeah, he skied like a ninja. He looked like he was in just the right state of mind to take flight through the winter. Flipped off of kickers and floated like a feather. He dodged hardwood trees like a wolf or a leopard. He leapt off tall buildings and bridges and boulders and bounced off a mogul so nimbly and cleverly, picking his lines up above through the cliffs, snow white as a dove above his knees and his hips, and he jumped. Floating on edges as smooth as can be. Yeah, Shane was a true superhero indeed, 'cause he was quite able to fly like a hawk, 'cause he'd been on skis since before he could talk. He flew like an eagle and soared through the sky. That's right, Shane McConkey, the best of all time, the best of the best. What an inspiration to ski life on the edge like it's meant to be done. So let's all sing Fly On Shane McConkey. Fly